Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Great.
Hello.
Yeah, great.
It's lovely seeing you all. And first of all, thank you again for having you here and for spending your time with us today. People in the chat, it's your time to shine. Ask your toughest questions about Angular, and I will make sure to transfer them into our lovely speakers. So let's get started. Maybe we can start with what makes you optimistic about the future of Angular? Like to start? Maybe Sarah?
Sure. Angular is a really interesting framework because of all of the frameworks, it's lasted the longest. It's lasted all of the waves of JavaScript, going all the way back to when we first started making Angular front-end frameworks. Angular was responsible for a lot of innovation in the industry, including like the adoption of TypeScript, which was something that Angular did first, SPA applications, and has really, really compelling strategies, especially for enterprise applications and applications at scale. It is the most used framework at Google. And part of the reason why I'm so excited about this stage of Angular is because we're really thinking about how we can address all of the unique needs for Google and everybody externally. And I think that push allows us to deeply think through performance and latency. I think it allows us to deeply think through things like dependency injection, developer experience, reactivity systems. And we've seen that in a lot of the team's work recently on things like signals that you might be aware of. I think that we've seen a lot of this kind of work come out of the team that's been really an explosive energy in the past few years, and we're really just getting started. Some of the really amazing things about it supporting so much internally is the push, the constant push on Angular to be super innovative. And I'm really excited about the next few years as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to also mention, the spa applications. Sarah, I could use a massage if you could help us figure out how we can get spa applications here. So I'm excited about the future of Angular for all of the things that Sarah mentioned, but I like how we've put so much effort into improving the developer experience across the board. We have, I think, since there was a period where we were spending a lot of time on a rendering engine change, and we had a little bit of stagnation happening there. That was before I joined. And then once we were able to land that, it was like, great, we can focus entirely on how we can improve this experience for everyone. And that, I feel like, has touched every part of the framework. It's a core part of everything that we think about when we're building new features too. And that gets me excited in that we actually get really strong positive feedback from people about this. And it's really uplifting to see that we're headed in the right direction there.
Yeah, I would add on to this. The thing that makes me most optimistic is the team that we have today. Our team is absolutely packed with people who are passionate and incredibly talented engineers who are very invested in Angular and the evolution of the framework over time. And not a week goes by without someone coming up with, taking on a project or coming up with something new that we could be doing that is exciting. And we have a lot of really good things cooking.
Awesome.
And maybe I can add to it because I'm the only non-Google employees in the panel. So, so for me,
Yes,
it's been
please.
with Angular as a GD for a long time and started in the days of Angular.js. What makes me super optimistic right now is the fact that Angular has been around for a very long time. It's going to be around for even longer, I believe. And yeah, super optimistic because the team seems to be
at peace right now, or able to ship stuff on schedule and keep going, and we see a lot of good things happening, and it just seems, I don't know if it's the first time in Angular history that we are at that point, but it seems very positive, and there's a lot of good stuff going on. We know that things are moving. We don't feel the weight of IV or the migration to V2 anymore. All of that is gone. And it feels like, the team can finally, go wherever they want to explore and build great stuff. And that's amazing for us. And, as someone who teaches Angular and web technologies a lot, I do feel the Angular renaissance going on, because in terms of training this year, there's a lot more demand for Angular than anything else at this point. So that's a great sign that we can be optimistic.
That's really cool. Thank you, Alan, for sharing that. So I have one more question here. Did you learn something in the Angular documentary that you didn't know about? And maybe we can start the opposite way this time. So maybe, Alan, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, and because I'm not a Googler, I had to learn some things in the documentary, of course, since I'm more of the outsider, at least. Yeah, there's two things that I was not aware about. The first one was how difficult it was early in the AngularJS days to find budget and support to get the team going. That's something I didn't know, and I was surprised to learn how they basically had to fight for their survival and make sure that the project was still running. And the other thing was the V2 migration, the fact that they had to do these internal partnerships and support other languages in order to be able to get things going, which added lots of challenges and everything. And made the job of the team a lot harder. So these are the two things I was surprised to learn about. And very much glad that the team made it through these hurdles and got to where we are today.
Nice. Does anyone else wants to add something?
I've been on the team for 10 years, so I don't know that there was anything in the documentary that was new for me. But I don't know, Sarah, I guess.
I mean, I took on, I'm not on the Angular team. I'm like Angular's grandma. I'm their director. I've been in open source communities for a long time. So I've seen Angular kind of from the outside for a long time. And then when I joined Google, I think I was probably like 100 docs were shared with me from people from in the team, out of the team. Like I met with people all around the company to kind of get history. So I didn't see anything in the Angular documentary that was surprising to me. I knew all of those things, but it's been very interesting for me. Unlike Jeremy, I haven't been on the team or with the team for so long. I've seen it from all of these different angles. And so getting those perspectives from so many different places, I just thought that the tale was told very thoughtfully by the Honeypot documentary folks.
Okay, so I'm coming to my next question, which is there anything you would change or add to the Angular documentary? And I think it's going well with what we were discussing. So since you guys, all of you know very well the Angular documentary, would you change something?
I can start off and saying, obviously a documentary can only be so long, and the filmmakers who made it can only tell like a certain slice of the story. There are plenty of people who have been involved with Angular over the years who, for logistical reasons or scheduling reasons or whatever else, the filmmakers weren't able to interview them, or maybe their interview wasn't something that made sense in the context of the story that the filmmaker was making. And so, there are plenty of other people who, were absolutely crucial to the history of Angular who don't appear in the documentary at all. And so that is something that I think would be great to capture more of that. But at the end of the day, right, you have an hour of people's attention to play with and only so much budget for flying around interviewing people. And so you end up with the product that you have.
Yeah, +1 to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to our next question. What are some common misconceptions about Angular that you frequently encounter online? And I guess that you're collaborating with a lot of people. Some of them maybe are junior, some of them more advanced. So what are some common misconceptions?
I think the biggest one is that Google doesn't use Angular. It is the most used framework at Google. It supports the largest application, which is Pantheon inside of Google. So like that one is a really strange one to keep hearing.
I think for me, the most common misconception just comes from like people who maybe learned Angular a long time ago and haven't looked at it till now. So they have kind of a skewed perception of what Angular is, similar to how a lot of backend engineers feel about JavaScript in general. They learned it back in the IE6 days and think it's still as horrible as it was back then. So I think that's the biggest thing I hear a lot of.
Mm-hmm. Do we have anything else?
Yeah, I mean, one I think that comes up a lot for me, maybe like more on the technical side, is I think people can like very easily get caught up in this idea of like there's an Angular specific way of doing things every time. It's like, hey, what is the Angular way of trying to think of some examples, right? But like, what's the Angular way of like writing to local storage, or what's the Angular way of adding two numbers? It's like, no, there's no Angular special thing about it, right? Just like do it how you normally would. You're at the end of the day, you're just writing JavaScript code. It's running in the browser, and you have a little bit of context about like where your code lives and when Angular is running it. But I think people get kind of over-indexed on there being kind of a framework-specific way of doing everything.
Oh yeah, I get that. Cool. So let's move on to some different questions and maybe something that more people are eager to learn about. What can we expect from Angular v20?
So I could talk a little bit about this. I actually have the v20 plan up here on my laptop.
Oh,
I was
the
expecting this
insights are
question.
here.
So really, one of the biggest things we're doing in v20 is that over the past few previous major releases, we have released a lot of APIs that are marked as developer preview or as experimental because we want to ship things fast and get feedback from people. And in v20, we're going to be stabilizing a lot of those APIs. So a lot of signal APIs, some of the hydration features that we have that Jessica has been working on. I think those are some of like the biggest things we're doing is like finally promoting those features to stable. We have some quality of life improvements in here too. So one of the things that's landed recently has been type checking for host bindings, which has been a little bit of a gap in the experience for a long time. It's like components and directives, they have these host bindings, which are super useful, but had no type checking before. And so this is something that kind of improves that and like adds a little bit more safety to your applications. Let's see. One of the things we are also looking at is on our component side, we're doing some experimental work for kind of headless components that are centered around accessibility and like using ARIA patterns as building blocks for more component experiences. We've done a little bit of this in the past as well with things like CDK menu, and we're continuing to push kind of more in that area of putting more focus on these like headless, styleless components. You can maybe kind of think of it as something that is comparable to like React ARIA. And there's probably some more things like there's a lot of like little quality of life improvement things, but I think those are some of the bigger items that are worth mentioning. I don't know if Jess, you have anything you want to highlight.
What about all those public APIs that everybody's using that we're planning on just ripping out? And I'm kidding. We're not actually doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there will be some deprecations that there are in every major release.
I know we're doing some more improvements to the server-side rendering experience, but that's a constant incremental improvement that we're working on. There's some things we're hoping to do with hydration that I don't know that we'll get to in V20, but I guess you can expect that we're going to continue on improving the hydration experience. So stay tuned for more on that.
And I guess one last thing I'll mention. So there's questions about V20. And so I'm not making any promises or commitments for V20, but one of the big places where we're spending time is looking at forms and how the forms system might evolve with reactivity and signals. And we have some really interesting things in the works there. I don't want to promise it for V20, whether you'll see anything or not, but it is something we're spending a lot of time on.
Yeah, we're going to resolve to continue working on that promise.
That's really cool, and thank you for sharing all this with us. I hope that the audience kept some notes, and tomorrow they will go to work or on social media and they will brag about the new things they learned about V20. Thank you guys for this. Let's keep up with our questions. So one of our attendees asked, how will change detection work with zoneless applications and signals?
Mm-hmm. So I can talk about this one. So the way that Angular change detection has historically worked is it relied on this library called Zone.js. And Zone.js comes in and it patches all of the browser APIs that might be doing something asynchronous, like set timeout, set interval, add event listener, promise.resolve, or promise.resolve.then. And whenever one of these asynchronous things would happen, then Zone would effectively inform Angular that say, hey, something has happened and you should go check to see if anything has changed. And so Angular will go through all of your bindings and your templates and say, hey, I have the previous value here. Let me check the current value. If they're different, I'm just going to go ahead and update this DOM node right here. So it will, directly update that text content or that attribute right in your DOM. And over time, we saw that Zone has a lot of problems. I won't necessarily get into all of them, but there's kind of problems around performance and developer experience and just having it function with more modern JavaScript. So for example, Zone can't patch the native await keyword. There's no API to patch. It's just a syntax. And so we knew that we had to move to something that was a little bit more sophisticated, a little more scalable than what Zone was doing. And so we landed on signals, where, in its most reductive explanation, right? A signal is a wrapper around a value, and you can track whenever that value is read or whenever that value is written, and thus you can have the kind of a dependency graph in your values of knowing, I have a value here that depends on these three other values, and when they change, I know I need to change these other things. And we are at a place now where we have this experimental support for Zoneless. And if you turn that on, the way change detection works today is that signals are effectively taking the place of what Zone.js did. And so whenever signal values are written, that is now notifying Angular that, hey, something specifically has changed, and I'll go do that change detection that I was doing before, comparing the values. That is kind of the stage we're in right now. Going into the future, there will be another stage where we can get to where we will be able to have kind of what we're thinking of now as signal-based components that say, hey, I can guarantee that everything I'm doing is through signals. And when we can get further along and get to that world where we have these signal-based components, we can be more granular about the way Angular checks for those changes. Because today it's still doing it at the same kind of level of granularity it was with zones, which is most of your application, or if you're using onPush, kind of limited subsets of your application. But if we get to kind of that further, more granular change detection that's driven by signals, we would be able to check things at internally. We have this concept of a view, which is the unit of DOM that we're rendering, and we would be able to do that change detection on a view by view level. And so when any particular signal changes, we would be able to do a lot less work in that dirty checking than we are doing today. And so we're part of the way through that journey to get there, but over time, it will get to a place where signals let us have kind of more and more efficient DOM updates.
Yeah, and I actually have a demo called angular-signals.netlify.app. If people want to play around with it, it kind of goes over some of these high-level premises. I mean, this is one of the big changes that I'm so proud of the team for making, because I think Zone was great for the time, but also like checked the world, as Jeremy is explaining. Signals is such an incredible implementation because it's built off so much of the great reactivity work that the community has done holistically. And I think it's one of the most compelling versions of both signals and also reactivity engines. If you look through the demo, it kind of describes some of the features of signals that you might be interested in, like settable signals, computed properties, which are really exciting because you can cache things based on dependencies, so you get really efficient updates. As we all know, when you're building JavaScript applications, the idea of state changing is one of the major reasons that you use a JavaScript application, or JavaScript framework. So some of the things that were built in here are they're great for developer experience, but they're also great for legibility. When people look at an application, you know what data is stored, you know how it's being used because of setting the signals, because of computed, because of effect, that they're all used in different ways. And so that makes it both great for the application to be updated, but also great for somebody jumping into your code to understand the intent of the code. So I'm really excited about the Angular team's work in all of this. There was a lot of thought, just a lot of thought put into this. And so I really am appreciative of that work.
And we're excited that eventually, zones will be fully probably out of Angular, but hopefully you won't zone out of Angular.
No, I think right now everyone will be super excited. Let's pass to another question. I feel this will be a little bit faster to answer it. Can we use signals for forms?
We're working on it.
Okay.
Soon.
So it was faster indeed. Maybe we can go to another one. Can you share what are new things cooking in Angular's kitchens? Something sneak peek, which I feel that we already talked about, but maybe if you guys keep something and you want to add it, maybe it's your last chance to do it now.
One thing I can maybe tease is watch for updates on future announcements around animations. There's some work happening there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like a couple years back, we announced on Twitter that we were working on convergence between the two major frameworks at Google, which is Wiz and Angular. I think that is something that's kind of a 10-year strategy for us, and we're a few years in. So as we make some of these updates, what you can look forward to as these two frameworks come together is a lot of deep performance and latency work. And that's really going to be crucial for a lot of these major applications that use Angular. So that's something that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the forms stuff already, but there's also some kind of longer term things we're looking at. So we've talked about this at a few different conferences, right? Of, hey, what would it look like if I could use components and directives without CSS selectors? What if I could just reference those directly by their identifier? And that is something we are in the kind of very early phases of, doing some design work around. And then even further out than that, right? Like we've talked about this a few times before, but like we know that there are some friction points and some boilerplate with the Angular authoring experience, and we are still kind of thinking about ways to streamline that and make it a little bit more ergonomic.
Yep. So people still seem to have quite a lot of questions. So is Jest ready to use for production projects? What about a web test runner?
So the Jest support is still an experimental. I believe that we are going to be making a decision soon about what we are going to be shipping in V20 for this. And so I don't have a concrete answer yet. It's still something that we're deciding. I think I can give a little background though on like why has it been an experimental for this long? Because it's been a couple of releases. And I think at the time at which we released this experimental support, right, there was a lot of demand for Jest as the kind of the thing people wanted to use. But very quickly after we did that, kind of some sentiment we'd been seeing started to change, and people started kind of like turned around and started asking, well, like, why are you doing Jest? Why aren't you doing V-type? And we are like, all right, let's pause what we're doing here on the Jest stuff and take a step back and kind of look at the broader landscape of kind of testing solutions and figure out what do we actually want to move forward with. And so we're kind of still in the middle of looking at that landscape and figuring out like what is the right next step for us to take.
Yeah, we're not trying to test your patience.
Okay. Let's move on to another question. Do you have any updates about the partnership between the Angular team and the Wiz team?
It's great. Yeah, they're great people.
People are curious. They want to know.
Yeah. Jess, do you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with dependency injection?
Sure. So, we've kind of slowly been working with the Wiz team on finding ways that we can share lower level primitives. And one of the first things we did was we worked with them on our event replay system, which is something that is available as part of hydration and is a core part of incremental hydration. That was something that the Wiz team originally developed called JS Action. And now it's shared, the implementation is shared between Angular and Wiz. We're doing the same kind of effort around dependency injection, where we are trying to be able to use the same dependency injection framework or implementation in both frameworks and be able to kind of use code in each framework across both of them, but with the same code, the same dependency code. And that work is currently ongoing. And if you check out in our primitives, our packages core primitives folder, you'll see that DI now exists there. And that's where the shape of that shared code lives. But it should be all very familiar to what you're used to on the Angular side. So, but it's been going very well. And this is just a prime example of our wonderful working relationship with the Wiz team.
I mean, Jeremy talked a little bit in the beginning about how wonderful the Angular team is. And I think that this is an example of this. The Wiz team and the Angular team are not historically two teams that were put together or shared convergence strategy. And it takes a lot at that kind of scale to work together and learn from one another. I think that the Angular team did such great, innovative concepts for signals, and the Wiz team was starting to work on reactivity, and it was like, wait, learn from the Angular team. And so they did, and they started using the Angular package, which is now powering YouTube. Then you see things on the other side, like the dependency injection. And this is where the two teams really work on whatever is best, whatever concepts are farther along, wherever the good idea comes from. It takes a lot for two teams to be able to kind of put things down and no technology religion, but really think through, like, the best idea can come from anywhere. I think it's really a place where ripe innovation happens, and it's a huge credit to both teams to do so, because there's a ton of day-to-day work that can happen on either team where it can be distracting and hard to do that kind of collaboration across team lines. And we're kind of ahead of where we thought we would be for convergence strategies, because these two teams are so thoughtful and are good at sharing concepts. So huge shout outs to both teams.
Exactly. Huge shout out. Let's move on to a couple of more general questions from our audience, and then we will go back to Jasmine, Web Test Runner, and more. So this time someone asked us, how does the Angular team interact with other web technologies and libraries?
Oh, it's a very broad question. I mean, I have my smart light bulbs that I can turn on and off. Like
Maybe you could give us a few examples.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to think of like, we have other folks in the web community that we collaborate with on supporting Angular in the ecosystem. So, we chat with folks who work on Prettier and the folks who work on WebStorm and the folks who work on like the Angular ESLint package, right? Like generally we have good relationships with other folks who are working kind of developer tooling and ecosystem tools around Angular. We have, dependencies that we use, right? We consume things like ESBuild and ArcGIS and Vite for various purposes. And, we use these things just like a lot of the web ecosystem does. Yeah, like we're participants in the like open source dependency graph, just like anyone else.
I think I can also add to this in that, like in the recent past, we have had regular conversations with other framework authors where we've invited them to tell us how their choices have worked out, how their framework is structured, and we try to learn from them and get inspired by them. We've also
of course
experimented with building apps with those frameworks to like learn the things we like about them and the things we don't like about them. To try to use those as inspiration to make our own choices about what we're going to do next. So I think one specific point that I'm remembering is how much of the framework team members seem to really like the Svelte syntax for templates. That's very much a strong pro, I think, from that experimentation that we did.
Yeah, a +1 to all of that. And then I think Minko is speaking a little bit later on. Minko has done a really good job of, understanding the community, bringing those experts. He finds experts to come talk internally to the Angular team. I do think that there's particular instances of really deep work that I'm like brought up in the documentary, one of which was working with Ryan Carnato on signals. I think Alex and Powell met with him pretty frequently and they threw ideas around together. That was a really good example of the whole JavaScript community kind of like not caring about my way or the highway, but just working together. I think that Angular is unique because it has to straddle Google's ecosystem and open source work. And so it's not as easy as just, we can just adopt this and boom, it happens. And so that also makes our relationships with the open source ecosystem, like Jeremy was talking about in terms of Jest, and like, when people are really excited about something like Jest, it can take a lot for us to make that work both internally and externally. So we really have to be thoughtful about our adoption of the open source ecosystem. And I think that the team does a ton of really good exploration, and it happens across multiple teams in the kind of web ecosystem and infrastructure.
Nice, thank you for this. And since we are talking about adoption, how much would Angular benefit from TypeScript moving to Go?
We don't know yet because we don't yet have access to kind of the interop APIs that the team at Microsoft is working on. And so once we can get our hands on the things that they've been working with, we'll have a better idea of how that fits into the ecosystem and what effects it's going to have. But we're very optimistic that Angular will, like long-term, like Angular applications will be able to reap the same magnitude benefits that Microsoft has seen for the projects they've already looked at switching to the Go toolchain.
Okay, so we have another question.
Yeah.
Okay, give me. Okay, so Microsoft announced they are porting the TypeScript compiler from JavaScript to Go, promising a staggering 10x performance improvement. How it's going to affect Angular performance?
Yeah, so the same answer, which is like still too early for us to know for
Yeah.
sure because we don't have anything that has been released from the team at Microsoft yet. And once they do, we're gonna try it out. We're gonna see what happens. But optimistically, like Angular applications, we're hoping should get the same level of improvement. It's going to depend on some factors, and so we'll see when we get it.
Okay. So another person is asking us, I would like to ask if in the future Angular plans to add band support. I think if there are these plans. Currently it works and can be used instead of NPM, but there are still some incompatible things when I use ban in my projects.
I don't have an answer for this. It's not something that is like concretely in our roadmap, but that could change. This is probably something that is mostly a function of how much feedback and how many requests we get for it. And so we do pay attention to those things, but we don't currently have anything on the roadmap for it.
Yeah, I do know that Jan on the team is running some experiments with things like bun and things like that. But they're still very much in R&D stage, so nothing really concrete to talk about.
Okay.
Definitely something that you can always open an issue on the repo to report. So definitely recommend that.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. So let's continue. Are there any other boilerplate simplifications planned other than import selector?
Yes.
We want to know.
I can, again, I will, I'll put some caveats here of like, nothing here is really decided. This is still in the phase of we're like talking through ideas and the trade-offs of those ideas and what kind of impacts they'd have for the ecosystem. But some of the ideas we're looking at is like, hey, what if you could author an Angular component in something that's not a class? Maybe that is something that looks like a function. Maybe that is something that looks like a single file component in the style of your Svelte. Maybe it's something new entirely that nobody has seen before. We are, playing around with these ideas with the specific intent of taking the problems or the friction points that Angular developers are experiencing today and asking, how would these solutions address those problems and kind of what trade-offs are we making, right? What are we making worse in adopting something else? How much churn are we introducing by kind of increasing more ways of doing things? And so these are all things we're thinking about and we're weighing, and we don't have like a concrete plan yet for what exactly that's going to be, but we know we want to do something.
Yeah, we are importing as many ideas as we can, but we're being very selective about our choices.
I mean, at a high level, Angular has been steadily working on developer experience for many years and trying to simplify as much of the experience and reduce boilerplate and things like that. You can see it kind of all over the place since the Ivy migration. And so like at a high level, we have been working on that and we'll continue to be working on that in the future.
Nice. Thank you very much for this. So our next question is, are planned specific Angular versions for mobile React Native alternative or for desktop Electron alternative? Thank you.
I can probably take this one because I work across the multi-plat team the most. So we, under my, in my organization, I have the web, Android, iOS, and multi-platform infrastructure at Google. Multi-plat at Google is very interesting because we have quite a few brownfield projects and ways of building. One of them is very compelling for server-driven UI. That's something that's used for YouTube and search. That one, what we're noticing about that one is that the demand for the type of developer experience that people want is very compatible with a React Native kind of feel. So we are looking into how we can share API layers between the Wiz and Angular convergence and the multi-platform work. That, again, is a very long strategy because these are very complicated old brownfield applications at scale. There are a lot of important kind of latency things that we have to look out for when we make any kind of these changes, any kind of changes of this nature. We need deep performance work, obviously, for things like search and YouTube. And so it is something that we're definitely interested in doing because the idea of code sharing across multiple properties is one that obviously accelerates development and development activities. And so it's something that we are deeply looking into now, but is still very much in an R&D phase and has to be done very thoughtfully with a lot of production data before shipping. So the answer is yes, but not in anything that I would announce like external development on. Basically, it's one of these things that we're working on and we have thought about open sourcing, and we'll share more information if that becomes available.
Maybe next year we will learn more about that. Okay, are you going to remove Zone.js library from Angular in future version?
Probably not. Time will tell, but the way we're thinking about it now is that fully removing support for Zone.js and no longer, updating and supporting Zone.js is far too breaking of a change for all of the Angular applications out there that exist today, because that transition from zone-based change detection to signals, we have tools that are trying to make that easier, but it's still going to come with some amount of cost to adopt that. And so our current thinking is that we will be supporting Zone.js for the foreseeable future. And ideally, we'll be getting to a point where Zoneless is the default and the recommended, and using zones for any new code is discouraged. But I have a hard time seeing it fully going away.
Okay. Does anyone else wants to add anything here? Okay. So, any updates for support for AI on Angular, web AI or local AI using Hugging Face models or using a custom trained light model?
We have done a little bit of, internal exploration R&D related to these things. We don't have anything to share or announce right now.
Cool. We will wait for this. Canvas in Gemini can convert designs to React code. Why not Angular?
I mean, the genuine answer is that these are large companies and large systems, and the Canvas in Gemini was developed. Obviously, Gemini is motoring and creating new and interesting APIs and innovations every week. We haven't been in chats with them about supporting Angular, but they obviously have very intense release schedules and things like that. So I think that this is more of a maybe if or when later down the road, rather than it is not supported.
I get that. Okay, let's see one more question that I feel it's a little bit more general. Why do you think people do comparison between Angular and other libraries or frameworks? For which type of software Angular is best and easy for development?
I mean, I think for the first question, this is just human nature. Comparison is just you see it in just about every industry or interest. So I don't think there's any real way around that. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add to that.
I actually I have a talk about this that I think is online, and it's about innovation in framework spaces. And what I would encourage us to think about is, if you look across the framework landscape over the many different waves, people have constantly been reinventing and redesigning things, and it kind of comes across like a brand new thing. But actually, if you look at all of the origins, we all learn from each other. It's an interconnected network. And so I think that rather than seeing it as a massive competition, I mean, web is big. It does not need to be a Highlander situation. I do think that all frameworks learn from one another and kind of adapt and evolve and things like that. So I would encourage the community to be thinking more along the lines of what can we learn from each other and how can we all grow, rather than like it's one or the other and it has to be us or something like that.
We've also had a lot of Angular team specific questions. Alain, would you like to add your thoughts?
Yeah. For this one, because I do teach, both React and Angular, one thing that is pretty obvious with Angular is that it's easier for backend people, Java, C#, .NET developers to get into Angular because they don't feel like they have to be deep in JavaScript in order to build with Angular, and they can just get into the TypeScript syntax, which is already close to what they know. So the learning curve seems to be easier for backend people, Java, C#, .NET backgrounds to get into Angular than React, because, for instance, with React, you have to know a lot of JavaScript tricks and array functions and all of that. So that's one of the things I see a lot in the industry, that, typical full stack developers usually find the learning curve with Angular a little bit easier. But the thing is, in the end, you're building components no matter what, right? You're building UI components, you're doing loops, and you're doing injection of dependencies, and it's just syntax differences between the different options. So when you know one, you pretty much know the other options. Just learn the other different syntaxes and stuff. So it's not, people tend to be very opinionated about things, but when you really know all of them, there's no reason to be that extreme, like this one is better than this one, and you have to do this, you have to do that. It's really depending on preference and what developers already know, what they're comfortable with. That's what's going to make it easier or better based on their background, not this is good for you, this is bad for you, I think.
No, I think I would agree with you. I don't have your background, but I think that I would also, as a developer, I would agree with this. Thank you very much. And let's continue to our next question. Can the component harnesses be used with any end-to-end testing framework?
Yes. So the component harnesses that are part of Angular CDK, which are great, and if you haven't checked out, you should, they have this concept of an environment. And so out of the box, they come with two kind of environment implementations. One is for WebDriver, and one is for kind of unit tests. But you can create your own custom environments, and it's not that difficult. I believe there's a community implementation of an environment for Cypress. And if there are any other like end-to-end testing environments, it should be relatively straightforward to create that implementation of that interface and use the harnesses in that environment.
Cool. Thank you. I want to dive deep to Angular development, but I'm currently doing Vue.js. Do you have the best place to learn it intensively?
I mean, actually, I used to be a Vue core team member, and I learned Angular moving over to the team. I found actually that the Angular documentation, especially since we've done the revamp, to be quite good. Alain, you do a lot of this kind of teaching. Maybe you want to talk through this.
Yeah, you can get in touch with me. I can show you plenty of different resources to learn for free, or get training. There's tons of resources everywhere. So I can guide you in some directions. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or social, and I'll be happy to give you more. Yeah.
That's perfect. Thank you, Alan. Do you recommend using Jasmine and Web Test Runner, or just for testing our new applications?
We don't really have a specific recommendation. Our goal is to, in the case of testing, is try to meet developers where they are. And so whatever, testing thing that, we support that works best for you, that would be the one that you probably want to go with. That said, we are, as I mentioned earlier, kind of looking at this testing landscape and figuring out what our support story in Angular CLI will look like. And that will include a default, and that default is probably going to have some amount of opinion baked into it. And so the goal is not to really have a super strong recommendation, but we probably will at some point in the future have at least an inclination about what we generate by default.
Thank you. Do we have a timeline for when Jest and Web Test Runner will no longer be considered experimental?
I can't commit to a specific timeline, but I can say that this is something that we're looking into right now. We might have a decision by V20, but I don't know if we will actually be able to do the necessary programming work to enact that decision by the time we get to V20. So we will see.
Great. And can you share some insights on adding more tutorial videos on YouTube for Angular from the Angular team members?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is asking should we add more videos, or is this saying should we talk about the experience of kind of shooting more videos, which we have been doing?
Well, I also don't really understand this question, but maybe this person can elaborate a little bit more, and if we have time in the end, we can go back to this question. So I'm going to the next one. Is it planned to add improvements to build PWA and micro frontends?
So we don't have anything in our, I'll call it our 1-year roadmap that is in these areas. So this is not something that we're actively focusing on. That's not to say we wouldn't ever come back and spend more time focusing on these things. It's just not something that we're going to be focusing on in the short term. That said, a little bit separate from Angular, there is kind of another group of engineers inside of Google who's doing some work on micro front ends generally. And we're in the loop in that work, and maybe at some point in the future we might be inspired by it to do something else. But again, like many things here today, we'll see. Time will tell.
Perfect. What have the Angular team built that end up not being released? That's a nice one.
Well, that is interesting. So there's one thing that comes to mind, which is that we do have a set of unit testing APIs that we use inside of Google. The name we use inside of Google for this is called Catalyst. And this was years ago. The decision was made to not open source it. However, you can, there is a snapshot of it on our GitHub in an archived repo somewhere of just for reference purposes, here's this API we never actually released. Just because we weren't fully confident back then, and I think this is probably 7 or 8 years ago, that it was the right set of APIs for what we wanted to do, even though it is kind of used a fair amount inside of Google. I'd have to think for a minute to think if there's anything else.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else.
Yeah. And we also have some UI widgets that are just only live inside of Google that we've never released publicly, just because they're kind of niche to Google use cases.
Okay.
I think we have RFCs out there that are in development and not quite released, but maybe that's not the same kind of spirit of the question.
Yeah, I feel like that's the stuff that's still in progress rather than not released.
Yeah.
We'll be waiting for all of these. Is there any plan for making SSR simpler to implement?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Work is ongoing on incremental SSR improvements. So,
yeah, if you haven't checked out some of Jessica's talks on this subject, you should definitely check them out. She has great demos and has done just a ton of dev work to make this better. So,
Yeah, and maybe that the question comes from someone who's not aware of what's been done lately in SSR, because it used to be trickier with universal and everything. Now you can pretty much do ng add Angular SSR and have something up and running in a few minutes, which is my next talk during this event later today.
Sure.
So you'll see that in action and see that it can be done very quickly and easily.
Perfect. So the person that asked that, make sure that you stay until the end, that we will have another talk by Alain. Okay, so any plans to support monorepos better like we currently can do with NX natively with the CLI?
Yeah, so this is another thing kind of similar to what we just talked about with like micro front ends and PWAs, where we don't have anything on our roadmap for like the next year or so, but it's something we've talked about several times. The conclusion we keep coming to is that it's not like the highest priority thing to focus on because tools like NX exist and people are happy using them. And so we're mostly focused on, you know, other things like making SSR easier and kind of improvements on the framework side of things. But again, something that is not off the table and something we may come back to in the future.
I love how we have responded to some of these questions with a simple yes, but we're never willing to do the no.
There are some things I think people could ask, like where we would give a concrete no, but for things like this and like the PWA stuff, like genuinely, we may come back to it. It's just not an area we're focusing on right now.
Yeah, and I think there are some other questions that all of you could create talks and speaking for, I don't know, 1 hour. So I can see how passionate you all are about Angular. Now we have one more question. Since Karma is deprecated, is Web Test Runner going to be replaced or going to replace it? Sorry, is it going to be production ready soon?
Yeah, I think we covered this a little bit earlier in the other questions where we've talked about the testing story. Definitely, like Web Test Runner, like is almost certainly going to be our replacement for Karma, considering that Karma has been kind of like deprecated and moving towards end of life. So like that part is like a pretty safe bet, but we'll have probably more information on the testing story in the not too distant future.
Perfect. And we have one last question. Actually, we have a lot more questions, but time pressure. So I will close with this one. According to latest changes in NGV20, why do we need to remove .component.ts, service.ts, directive.ts from the files? What is the benefit of this renaming?
Yeah, so we did an RFC about this. So it was probably a longer conversation than we have time to get in. We're effectively out of time now. But I'd say go check out that RFC. Some of our justification is in there. And it's, I won't get into all of the reasons here. Go check out the RFC. We kind of outline all of the justification there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for answering all of the questions. But since we actually have quite a few more questions, if some of you folks have some more time, please feel free to join the conversation on a video. So maybe if you have some time, you can answer some more questions. But once again, thank you, Sarah, Jessica, Jeremy, and Alan for joining us. And some of you, I will see you later as you have another talk.